Well, everybody, welcome to Austin. So we're going to be talking today about, I think, a topic that's very relevant across the ETS conference today. We're going to be talking about decentralizing the grid. Today, we're hearing a lot about the different opportunities for distributed energy resources across the grid. And there are different drivers that are making that a reality. I mean, the world is really changing. First of all, there's a lot of technological options that have emerged over the last 10 years and are making this a reality. We're seeing PV energy storage. Plus, those options are becoming cheaper over time. And so that's creating the opportunity for clients or end consumers to opt for those solutions instead of the traditional solutions from the grid. There's also other opportunities that are emerging, which is regulatory change, right? So with these distributed energy resources, there are opportunities to essentially have aggregate these resources and have market participation, capture more value. There's also technological change in terms of integrating these resources. Plus, end consumers are seeing all these options and they're saying, well, I want to install that behind the grid. And with all these options, they're better able to meet their load needs and they're better able to meet their sustainability goals. And across all this, we also have a big push for decarbonization. So end consumers are looking for those options. So today, we have a great panel, very diverse panel. I'd invite the panel to come up. Essentially, we have panelists both from the utility side and the technology side. So I'll sit down over here. And so in this panel, we have on the far end there, we have Erika Dresselhuys. Did I get it right? Close enough. All right. My last name's terrible. It's hard to pronounce, so I totally understand and can relate. But he's the CEO of ESS, which is energy storage technology company. They're looking to deploy long-duration storage, specifically flow batteries, and they're looking to deploy that technology across different market segments, amongst them distributed generation and within consumers. We also have Adrian Rodriguez, who has a long track record in the industry. He told me he was original from El Paso. I'm also original from El Paso, so we have that in common. There's a couple of Paso people here, so there's that connection here. But he's a senior vice president at PSE, and he oversees regulatory issues and strategy. And I think his perspective is going to be very valuable in trying to discuss some of the market and regulatory challenges around distributed generation. We also have, I'm going to do a terrible name with your last name as well, but I'll try. We have Erika Biersbach. Did I get it right? Close enough, okay. And she is the Vice President of Energy and Market Operations and Resource Planning at Austin Energy. And so she's actually seeing how these technologies can be used in long-term planning and also in grid operations. So she's going to bring, and market operations, so she's going to bring just a different perspective from the utility side. And then finally, we have Jessica Christensen, who is joining us from El Paso Electric. And she's a Senior Director of Innovation and Sustainability. So she's looking at different opportunities for these technologies across the customer base and also to make the operations of El Paso Electric more sustainable. So we have a great panel with different perspectives. And so, what I like to start the panel off with is with a question, which is, what are some of the key challenges in deploying and maximizing the value of distributing energy resource today? Like, what are the challenges that you're seeing today as we're trying to deploy those resources? So I don't know if there's somebody that would like to start us off with that question.
Happy to start off. So we really right now we are Austin Energy has a pilot program where we're going to be doing front of the meter and behind the meter distributed generation as a resiliency product for our customers. And is it not very loud? Oh, is that better? Okay, sorry.
Okay.
So my apologies. So for us, being able to, part of our program and the way it really works is, and we're not recreating the wheel, it's kind of an enchanted rock type program where we're monetizing those assets in the wholesale market. We compete in the wholesale market like everyone else. We're a non-opt-in entity because we're public power, we're the city's utility, but we don't compete, our retail doesn't compete, but in the wholesale market we do. So by being able to construct a three-way type arrangement with our customers, we can lower the cost of resiliency to our customers quite a bit. But the challenges that we face is really kind of existing infrastructure, existing regulatory rule, those things that don't allow us to be creative because of the way things are already. So for us, I think that's really where the barriers lie. We're trying to establish contracts and programs that will allow us to be able to facilitate in the future things like solar, PV, battery, where that's what our customers ultimately want, but it's not there yet for them to be able to quite have. So to be able to create a bridge and create contracts that are shorter term in nature that allow us to be able to move into something that's, more towards the zero carbon goal that we have, that we've committed to in 2035. So for us, it's that existing infrastructure, whether it be on my distribution system or whether it be in the market design, that really makes it more difficult for us to be able to achieve the goal, even though we'll get there, but it just makes it harder.
Excellent. Would somebody like to bring a different perspective?
Well, I don't know that it's a different perspective, but I think something Erika said is really important to maybe calibrate the audience, which is we have, I think, a tendency in the industry when we talk about distributed resources, people their heads kind of immediately jump to rooftop solar, owned by the customer or by a third party, a Sunrun or somebody like that. And the universe around distributed resources is a lot bigger than that. And so you've got, of course, things that happen at the customer premise, as Erika said, front of the meter, behind the meter things. That's one demarc, but there's also a move by a lot of utilities to try to move distribution, generation, storage assets further into the grid. So you're looking at energy storage as a resiliency tool. You're looking at it as a capacity management tool. Probably we could have a whole panel just on grid congestion issues and grid interconnect queues. And so I think the one thing I'd put out for everybody, and it really dovetails on what Erika said, is that the applications and the use cases for distributed resources are kind of growing exponentially, and that's making this rulemaking challenge. What are the policies? How do these things get monetized? Who's allowed to do what? That rule book really has to kind of get moving because we're still playing with a 20 to 30-year-old rule book.
Excellent. So I don't know if Adrian, you would like to comment a little bit on how you see the regulatory piece playing out. I think Eric mentioned that that's one of the big challenges around the deployment of these technologies.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things to consider is the fact that you're talking to on the utility side, two companies, one on the U.S.-Mexico border, one on the U.S.-Canadian border, investor-owned utilities and public power, whether you're a co-op, you're facing a lot of the same challenges on that legal front, on the policy-making front. But the one thing that is changing, or at least moving us in a direction where we are going to be enabled to do these things, is that it's demanded by customers, which means that constituents are expecting it of policymakers. which means that policymakers are changing some of the structures that is now translating over to regulators. And then we're, as a utility, no matter what sector we're in, we're now able to really deal with the internal history that we need to overcome and contend with in order to meet those expectations from policymakers, customers, and ultimately regulators. And so I think that's where we're going to see a lot of that push, is because this is a groundswell. It is expected by customers. They still expect the light to turn on when we flip the switch. That's going to. I think the comment was made earlier by Carlos. That's still an expectation. That's a baseline expectation. It's these additional technologies. And for example, we have a distributed energy resource request for proposal that's pending that is part of a Clean Energy Transformation Act program that the state of Washington is enabled the utilities to now start to pursue. So this is work that we're doing, and again, it's brought upon by our policymakers.
Right. So how do you, I mean, pushing a little bit on that, I mean, there's a lot of change happening, a lot new technologies, and a lot new options. Do you think the regulators are moving fast enough to actually take on this change? Do you think there's some challenges around how fast you move, how much you wait? What are your thoughts on that?
Our regulators have many of the same statutory challenges that we as utilities have. They're our partner in this. So the issue there is that making sure that we maintain that dialogue so that if they identify a constraint from the same rules that we have, remember, regulators are dealing with many of the same rules that we as utilities are dealing with, to be able to bring them along and to have those conversations with policymakers if there is something in the statutes that they or we as utilities need in order to enable the change.
Excellent.
And if I could just jump on the back of that, I think Adrian's exactly right but I think the nuance about regulatory and policy changes keeping pace is different regionally. I mean, Adrian's operating in the Pacific Northwest, a fairly progressive space by, interested in all the benefits that DER provides. El Paso Electric, we're operating obviously in far west Texas and southern New Mexico. The regulatory frameworks between those two jurisdictions are extraordinarily different. The motivations are really different. And I think one of the things that we can do as a utility, in addition to facilitating that conversation, is really recognize and work to quantify for our policymakers and our regulators the entirety of the scope of benefits distributed energy allows. As we've all mentioned on this panel and the previous panel, reliability is still primarily king, right? But as utilities, our customers have come to expect that, and in large cases take it for granted. So now we have to figure out a way to assign the value to those other benefits, to the resiliency benefits, to the decarbonization benefits, to the opportunities to create equitable access to clean energy for the entirety of our customer base. So I think it just becomes somewhat incumbent on the utilities, if we want our regulators to move a little bit faster, to help them understand and quantify some of these benefits that to date we still talk about in a more qualitative manner.
Excellent. So one of the things I heard mentioned in the panel was the importance of end consumers and how they're pushing for these new solutions. I guess a follow-up question would be, why are end consumers, what are the reasons they are seeking these distributed energy solutions? And do you see any trends amongst what's becoming more popular in their demands?
I'll take a stab at that. So one obvious one for us is Uri just happened, and we had a lot of people that normally wouldn't have thought about resiliency for generators, natural gas generators, started to think like, I need to have this in my backyard now. And we had a bill passed, that is requiring certain parts of the market to be able to provide this for critical load. So to us, my team, it was an opportunity for us to be able to show how distributed generation can be leveraged in the marketplace. And that's really our effort, is to be able to help monetize DG in the market so then we can make these succeed. It's great to have a product or a program or an application out there that's created, in a, somewhere up the chain. but we're the operations, we're the utility, and so we're the ones that are quantifying what that value is. I am paying for it, so I need to make sure that I'm getting that money back in the market. So this is something that we are very acute with our customers to explain that value and how we're monetizing it, so they understand that how they size these, how they decide to expand in our service territory. This will be a part of their business solution. So, there's a lot that can be bundled. Like Eric said, once you start to break down all of the services that this can mean for our customers, and then ultimately for me, it's for my whole portfolio. So I think there's a lot of different reasons. Just trying to, break it down to see how it can fit the different customers is pretty important.
Well, I think you just picked up on an important thing. I'm sure everybody in this audience knows because they're very smart people, but we have to stop thinking about consumers or customers as one monolithic block where everybody wants the same thing. Because you have some people who, even if the economics weren't right, would want solar panels on their roof because they want solar panels on their roof, and they will make a personal judgment on the green benefit that's quite high. And you have somebody else who says, listen, I want all my power to be carbon free, but I don't want to do any work. So could somebody just do that for me? We have large commercial customers who are putting, very long duration energy storage behind the meter at their site to pair with solar or micro wind that they've already installed. They're very hands-on. Energy is a very big part of how they think about it. And they build very sophisticated models to understand the value propositions and how much is resiliency worth and all of that stuff. How can I play in the markets? Is there a capacity market? Could I bid ancillary services into things? They really kind of geek off on it. And then just as many other large, think of the hyperscaler cloud providers. Most of them care a lot about it. They have big teams, but mostly they're outsourcing it. They're buying PPA contracts and they're doing it in other ways. So you can't paint everybody with the same brush. And I think that's a challenge for regulators who are used to, as we think about these issues of fairness and equity, how do I give the customers what they want, but make it fair to everybody at the same time? And that's a real trick.
Eric raises an interesting point there regarding that different customers obviously want different things. They're having to really start thinking about who is the vocal voice and participating in these proceedings, whether they be at the regulator, whether they be at a city council, or whether they be at a state legislature. Because now we're having to place that perspective that we as utilities have generally had of balancing affordability, reliability, safety, and now equity. Those conversations really need to be key, and the individuals who many times advocate in these forums are not the individuals who are ultimately, paying the vast majority of the bills. So there's different stakeholdering processes that you're starting to see pop up around the country, and one that we generally have is now trying to bring in some additional voices that are not your standard participants in the industry and who are appearing at House and Senate energy committees. You're really kind of starting to have a different perspective on equity as the utility and making sure that you're engaging with individuals who are not normally the people that engage in your stakeholdering processes.
Yeah, well, it seems like just understanding the consumer base is becoming quite interesting, and being able to segment and understand the different solutions that you could provide to the different base. Obviously, there's different concerns, right? There's a need for sustainability, cheaper energy, but also resiliency is becoming an important issue, and so it seems like a pretty exciting time. I like to get into some of the actual things that some of your organizations might be doing. I mean, we have a broad set of perspectives here. So I'd like to learn a little bit more about some of the projects that you are involved with in helping push the boundary of distributed energy. Is there a project specifically that you would like to discuss and tell us a little bit about?
So I can kick us off here. I guess I have to preface any answer I give you by full disclosure on sort of where El Paso Electric is in our journey in this space. And again, dovetailing from the previous panel, we are, for better or for worse, one of those 20% of utilities and customer base that does not have AMI. So we are currently deep diving AMI and in the midst of proceedings in both Texas and New Mexico for regulatory approval, and hope to launch that off the ground. So that being said, a lot of our DER projects are new construction and largely C&I and larger customer specific. We have a lot of demand driven primarily by resiliency objectives from everyone from school districts to larger institutional customers to come up with what we might otherwise identify as system resource solutions that have the ability to become dedicated resource solutions under a certain suite of conditions that would qualify as a resiliency solution. So we're really moving in that direction. We're hearing a lot, speaking about sort of the heterogeneity of our customer base, a lot of motivation for achievement of sustainability goals, so people looking for those green resources, again, that they can take the full credit for in their own sustainability initiatives. And then certainly resiliency, though we fared better than much of the rest of Texas in the winter storm a year ago, it certainly has everyone's attention and has really been a driver for our customers.
Excellent. Erika.
So first I mentioned Resiliency as a Service. It's a program that we are launching, which is 25 megawatt pilot behind the program and a 200 megawatt pilot in front of the meter. Say behind the meter, in front of the meter, I'm sorry. And this, I kind of described it, it's not super unique, it's just more unique in public power where we're working with our customers and vendors that'll compete for our customers' business in an environment, that we're a city department. One thing that is funny is I had some residents actually approach me and ask if they could be a part of a program that was residential driven, that they would get generators and they would sell me a call option. So I can't wait to launch that program. I'm very hopeful. But there's other things that our Customer Energy Solutions group is doing, very exciting things with EVs and such. And as the market participant, as the wholesale market part of our organization, I'm working with those groups to try and see how I can leverage those opportunities in the marketplace. So we're setting ourselves up, whether it's with systems, whether it's with processes, programs, to be able to facilitate as much as possible as those things start to become more market able. The only other thing I would say is that, I've been with Austin Energy for like 20 years now, and we have 5,000 megawatts of both fossil fuel and renewable gen. So 2 of the fossil and 3 of the renewable, 3,000. And what we've been doing over the last 2 to 3 years is going from, very large scale to very granular type programs. So whether it's my community solar programs, whether it's working with ABIA, the airport to put rooftop solar on their garages. So we're going from, very, very large scale type projects to working with very small scale, granular type projects, so then I can pull those into my portfolio, so I can monetize those, and I can have steel on the ground in my service area because I do have basis separation that's really causing a problem, and I need to be able to have assets that I can control. So kind of trying to meet my needs with what's going on in the marketplace, I think, is how you get creative with DR and DG.
On our end, we've got the pending demand or distributed energy resources request for proposal, and this is seeking up to 129 megawatts of distributed energy resources on our system by 2025, with an amount over 500 megawatts by 2030. So our trajectory is pretty quick. But to note, we are toward the end of our advanced metering infrastructure deployment, but that will be operationalized, and then we'll be able to implement many of those DER resources, and then also to put them in the form of programs, whether that's energy efficiency, batteries, or demand response.
Excellent.
But I would say I'll share a specific project that we're involved in that I'm excited about. But I think one of the things you hear across all of this is this interplay between what's happening on the technology side and what that enables, and then how that lights up new opportunities from a market perspective, and vice versa. As the market needs are evolving, I'll speak for kind of all of the vendor technology folks in the room. There's this kind of oversized ear open to try to understand where things are going to, so we can get ahead of it and build the product. So we build these, these big batteries that are non-lithium based, and we hear from people all the time. In this specific project in Southern California with SDG&E, this is an area that's in a wildfire zone, subject to power safety shutoffs. So kind of a big problem. So the initial use case is resiliency. I've got a hospital and a police station and a bunch of critical infrastructure. When we do power safety shutoffs, I got to keep those guys powered. So that's pretty important. So that's kind of use case number one, but they're saying, hey, if I team that with solar and a non-toxic, non-flammable battery, now I can also do time shifting, kind of bulk shifting of the renewables and play that into the market at night. And oh, by the way, it's also something that can be used for ancillary services and other bid-ins to the market, end. So, the technology interplay with the market need is, I think, going to be something that's really fun to watch. If you look at the amount of money that's being invested by both large corporates and in the VC world into energy tech right now, there's this, kind of huge amount of new things that are going to be coming out, and it's kind of incumbent on all of us to find ways to put those to use in the market and figure out how to make them hum.
Excellent. So, yeah, I think initially when we were talking about distributed energy resources, it was in the early stages, it was very customer focused, right? Solving a specific problem, maybe getting energy or reliability problem. But what we do see happening a lot in the marketplace is the opportunity for these resources to be aggregated and participate in the market, and not only create value for the customer itself, but also create additional value for the system as well, and also help optimize utilities portfolios. So along these lines, we see a lot of activity in this space, like you mentioned, Eric. I mean, a lot of investment. We've seen a lot of investment over the past 5 years in the VC world, 10 years in technologies to aggregate these resources, to help operate these resources. Do you think that this is actually becoming a reality? Do you guys see it as something that's there? Is there still a lot more to do? And what are some of the key problems that you're seeing actually for resources to participate in the market? Are you seeing some challenges around that?
Well, I'll take the first crack. It's unequivocally real. I think we've crossed a tipping point. People have made comments, if you've been doing this for a while, it feels different now. I've been doing this for 30 years, it feels different now. So I look at it, and I was taken by something Carlos said on the earlier panel. He said, that they do more gas, more energy content in gas than they do in electric. You can't throw the switch and just make that all electric. If you look at it on a global basis, if we're going to electrify everything, right? We're going to take 800 million people around the world who aren't on the grid, get them on the grid. We're going to electrify transportation. We're going to take all the cooking fuel. If you add all of it up, we're not actually decarbonizing the current energy system. We're going to rebuild the entire energy system with something that's about 2.5 times the total size of our current electricity system. And oh, by the way, it's going to be decarbonized. So other than that, what are you going to do for me next week, right? So I think that gets to the challenge. The challenge is the speed and the pace at which it happens is way, way, way too slow, right? Just if you look at any state, we have 14 states now just in the U.S., keeping it kind of local, that have goals for decarbonization, including Portland, Oregon, where we are, Washington. Great goals, big picture policies right on. How are those two states, very progressive states, doing against their decarbonization goals? We're failing. We're way behind schedule. The report cards that have come out have said, we're not nearly on pace for what the policy objectives were. So I think that's going to be the biggest challenge, is how do we just do a lot more faster?
I think key thing is that it is an and not an or. And I think in some conversations, there's an expectation that it'll be distributed energy resources, and now we don't need to worry about a transmission grid or utility scale resources. they're going to need to be part of the equation. And we've seen many of the discussions about, look at where the mass majority of utility scale resources are located. They're in the central part of the United States. Now you're going to have to have transmission lines that get it over to your localized areas or to the coasts. If they have distributed energy resources, and we've seen weather patterns that are extremely regional. I mean, the cold front that hit Texas back in February was one that caused rolling blackouts in MISO and SPP, not just in the ERCOT grid. So these are regional weather patterns. If you've got distributed energy resources and that in a local area, that's great for maintaining the resiliency within that local area. We need to be mindful that the power, especially the backup power in a regional weather event, is going to come from other parts of the country. So it's an and rather than an or on the DER conversation.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add to that is, I mentioned 3,000 megawatts of utility scale renewable that, Austin Energy has added to the ERCOT grid. So we've really been, aggressive cleaning up the grid. 10% at times or more of the total. Now I've been going from a resource planning type thought process, which is the big picture, down to what I read and follow and are applying in my own group is integrated distributed planning. So I'm working with my wires, I'm working with my customer energy solutions to pull those again into the market, so then I can have something that's a holistic type engagement in my community. So I don't say cleaning up my community, but trying to apply in my community is a bigger lift than me, pulling off 200 and 300 megawatt, utility scale projects in West Texas. That I can do on my own. The stuff that I have to do here in the community it's a lot more intricate. There's a lot more people involved, and it's a lot tougher, and it's for a much smaller amount. There's still a lot of value there, but it's just difficult than the stuff I was doing before.
So along those lines, there's convergence of transportation with the electricity consumption, basically. So there's a convergence there. There's also, a lot different options that are being integrated, and things are changing rapidly, perhaps not fast enough. Usually technology adoption curves are shaped like an S, and maybe we're here at the bottom of the S, and it's really hard to, when you're in this, hockey stick part of the S, it's really hard to know how fast things are changing or how fast we're going. So in that context, and as you mentioned, Erika, you have to think about planning in a very different way, right? So how do you actually plan now? As somebody that is, trying to actually develop the network over time, how do you consider these resources in the planning? Can you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges and opportunities that you're seeing there?
Yeah, I think that list is really long. I'm sure we all have something to add to it. But I think, one of the things right now, at least forecasting DER penetration is as much art as it is science. And I think in New Mexico, we're working on a fairly broad grid modernization bill. And one of the things included in there is, how do we accurately forecast for distributed energy resources? How do we plan around it? Do we then have separate planning from integrated resource planning for this distribution type planning that's different than what we've historically done as distribution system planning? I think agree with what I think I'm hearing Erika say, is that those things can't be separate. They've got to be together. And I think it goes back to what Adrian said about the solutions are and, not or. And so how do we figure out how we maintain existing system resources, continue to make the investments in those large-scale, utility-scale projects, but concurrently plan and integrate the distributed resources? And I think we've got to find ways to do those in tandem. And it's just the forecasting and the data gathering that I think is going to drive that and make it more precise.
Well, I'm glad that these guys are doing it, right? We're lucky. We just get to build products and help. But people need to, we kind of joke, you have to do the math, right? There's a lot of these kind of high, lofty goals around decarbonization or distributed, but at the end of the day, the guiding principle that everybody's called out of, when I flip the light switch, the lights come on, right? That's like kind of table stakes in this business. And so as we look at all these new technologies that are coming on, it's also a challenge. What's the old line? That technology tends to have less of an impact in the short term than you expect, and more of an impact in the long term than you expect. And so as the new technologies that are coming through this funding are rolling through, folks here are being asked to figure out what is 2030, you hear 2032, 2040, these long time out, things. And so you're not just guessing on the static system with nothing moving, how would I transition that to a decarbonized thing 10 years from now or 20 years from now, whatever your time frame is. All of these other things are moving around underneath you. So you're actually anticipating, you're building a future that doesn't exist. And I don't think you can't plan that in the old way, right? You can't have an old style integrated resource plan, among other reasons, because you're not going to own all the assets. But the folks here are still going to be held responsible for making the whole thing work.
Right.
That's hard.
Yeah.
And I would just add, also there's parts of the organization, whether you're public power or IOU, that there's still that old mindset there. They're still on these huge ship liners or ocean liners, and there's others in the business that have to be much more nimble because technology is moving fast, because our customers want things and we bring them to the table. That's our leverage. These data centers, they need this. They need this kind of power voltage, or they need this kind of certainty. And, other parts of our customer base are looking for other things. And so trying to get those parts of the organization that are moving much more slowly, I think is one of our biggest challenges, because the nimble parts of are waiting and waiting and waiting and just saying, you guys got to catch on, because, we're losing value, or we're losing opportunities. And I think that can be a huge challenge for us.
One thing that Erika just noted was we've got is those parts of the business or colleagues that may not necessarily see the perspective that we're having to contend with today, and many of you all in this audience are as well. The great thing about it is that we have empirical evidence, and the part of that is if we have colleagues from 20 years ago, 10 years ago, there's a person maybe somewhere in the organization who said, we're never going to see a utility scale solar project on our grid, or we're not going to see wind on our grid. And it is now. It is there. So there's that empirical evidence that it is shifted, and now the next stage of it is moving into the distributed energy resource phase. So the great thing is, within our lifetimes, we've seen these shifts, whereas maybe not necessarily those shifts would have necessarily happened in the industry prior to the time of large scale change in our energy industry.
Well, I think we're living a pretty interesting time, because I think if we look historically at how resource planning was done and capacity planning was done, was based on trying to figure out if there was going to be unserved energy because the demand was growing. But we're in a world today where we're integrating distributed energy resources. We have uncertainty around how the grid is going to operate. We've got renewable energy that is being integrated, that is creating also variability and uncertainty for the grid. We've also got other requirements in terms of very strong decarbonization goals in some places. So we have all this stuff that needs to be considered, and then new operational dynamics that are, unknown in the future of how the system's going to operate, how are the reliability services going to be provided. And so we have all this uncertainty, we have to plan. So it's an interesting challenge that we're living through, and we have to face. It'll be interesting to see what direction it goes. I guess I would like to open it up for questions in the audience. I don't know if anybody has a question. If somebody has one, we could take that one, or if not, we can continue the discussion.
We have a question from Slido, actually, from the audience. This question is from Herman, and he says, to what extent will ratepayers be willing to pay for more resiliency? Where's the sweet spot? Presumably, the utility side capital will increase the rate base. Question mark.
Well, it's happening here in Texas, so. And part of the reason our ratepayers are willing to pay for resiliency is because I'm willing to pay for a lot of that chunk of it. So they see it as, certainly I've gotten the pushback of, I'm not in the energy industry, right? I don't want to make electricity. And what we're trying to explain to them is this is an insurance, premium that they're paying because our customers are getting smarter and they want diversity. They don't want to have to just rely on one place or one location. And we're explaining, or at least we are poising ourselves as being their partner, because we want them to have access to a lot of products and a lot of different ways to access the market. And so by showing them that we are a gateway to be able to monetize, whether it's their solar PV. I mean, some of our customers do very well with our VOS product that we have, and they're very, very happy. We have over 100 megawatts of rooftop solar. So I think that in general we've gotten a very good response on ratepayers looking at resiliency as a service and something that they're a part of to access.
Eric raised this point earlier when he talked about that customers are not just one monolithic group. And so on the whole, I would say you are seeing customers that are willing to pay for the resiliency. They're willing to pay for the innovation. They're willing to pay for the fact that they themselves can see the part that they can play in having a non-carbon emitting resource on their home. Obviously, there's a large segment of the population as well that may have some affordability issues. So this is where we can have those conversations on behalf of those customers with our regulator and with our policymakers on, let's say, for example, low-income energy rates or customer assistance programs. And those are going to need to be part of the equation just to make sure that there is not a segment of the population that is left behind as we're having this conversation about new distributed energy resources. That's where the equity component, and I know we've heard a lot about that in different state legislatures and in different city councils. This is the key aspect of that conversation, and I mentioned it earlier, in that the customers who are not necessarily present, we need to sometimes as utilities be the advocates for their voices, and it's great when there are also vendors as well that recognize the equity component and are bringing those products to the table.
Yeah, we can't have a system where only rich people have resiliency, right? I mean, that can't be the end game.
Right. Yeah, resiliency and adequacy is something very hard in many ways to communicate, because you basically have to have an asset maybe sitting there all year round and only coming on for 5% of the year, but it's going to get you out of the toughest situations that we've experienced here in Texas with the winter storm. And so whenever you have those assets and they save you from something like that, then you're pretty happy. But it's really easy to forget those things can actually happen.
Your homeowner's insurance is really, really expensive until your house burns down.
Yes, exactly. I think we have time for one more question, if there's anybody in the audience that wants to take.
I have a question. Certainly, the decentralization of the grid is all focused on renewables today, and we are very diverse across the regions of the country. Is there any national appetite or any regional appetite for revisiting small nuclear reactors on a decentralized basis? The economics seem to make sense, but the environmental issues and the justice and equity issues are very complex. I don't know if anybody on the panel would like to talk about that.
So we've had, I think that utilities are starting to have that.
How small a reactor are we talking about here?
Exactly. I think that you'll see that maybe mostly at the utility scale. When we say small cell nuclear, I think this is that part of the conversation that is an and. It is probably, because of the cost and where it is in the technology, something that we as utilities are starting to contemplate and trying to identify how we integrate it into our integrated resource plans. I look at our colleagues at Pacificor, who have a pilot project with the U.S. Department of Energy on a small cell nuclear project in Wyoming, and we're going to learn a lot from that as an industry. But to Eric's point, yeah, we're probably not talking about it every customer home.
Flux capacitors for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, one challenge that you see whenever you have capacity planning is that the value of storage is very coupled with the energy available in the grid, essentially. So there's a correlation. And so, I mean, whenever you storage charges and discharges, it doesn't generate energy, so it needs other sources. So, I mean, I think there's going to be a need for energy in the grid. So energy storage can be charged, and it can come on during those tough periods as well. And there might be need for other sources as well, other green power fields as well, that could come on for 5% of the time. So it's going to be an all of the above type discussion. So I think that's it on time. I'd like to really thank the panel for very interesting discussion, and it was great having you, provide us such great insights. Appreciate it.